Freed by a cowboy, a captive Apache woman chose him as her husband. Emotional Western story, Red Mesa's twin suns burned like molten gold over the endless desert plains. The planet had a rough beauty, jagged cliffs, swirling red sand, and shadows stretching long and sharp across the canyon floors. Among the settlers and colonists who dared to make their home here, whispers of danger were never far. Mercenaries, bandits, and robed traders moved freely across the barren lands, and few dared to challenge them. In a small dusty town called Dusthaven, a lone man rode in on a hover horse. The creature floated just above the sand, its metal hooves humming softly, kicking up red dust as it carried its rider toward the town center. The man, Jake Callahan, had the look of someone who had spent a lifetime in harsh places. A wide-brimmed hat pulled low, sunburned skin, and eyes that had seen too many battles. His long coat flapped against the desert wind, and a leather bandolier crossed his chest holding his plasma revolvers. Jake had been chasing rumors for weeks. Rumors of a young Apache woman named Ahioka, taken from her tribe by a ruthless gang of mercenaries who sold humans and aliens alike to the highest bidder. He had heard whispers in bars, from miners and wandering traders. "She's being moved north," a grizzled bartender had said. "No one dares touch them." Jake did not fear danger. Danger was his home. But he respected it, like a wild animal, and he respected Ahioka. He did not know her yet, but he could feel it. She was strong, brave, and she needed him. Far across Red Mesa, in the jagged canyons near the Obsidian Ridge, Ahioka sat on a metal floor, hands bound by energy cuffs that hummed faintly against her wrists. Her dark hair fell across her face and her eyes. Fierce and unyielding scanned the shadows. She had been captured weeks ago by mercenaries during a raid on her settlement. They had promised to take her to a safe location, but instead they had imprisoned her in a moving fortress, a hybrid of old-world technology and salvaged alien machinery. Ahioka had not lost hope, though. Her people had taught her resilience. She had learned to watch, to listen, to wait. But now, hunger and exhaustion weighed on her. The desert sun had scorched her skin, and the fortress offered no comfort. Every time the metal doors opened, she prepared herself to fight, but she was alone. Jake had tracked the mercenary convoy for days, moving across the desert using every tool he had. A map projected from his wrist device showed their route: a moving fortress, 3 hover sleds carrying supplies, and guards armed with laser rifles. He studied their pattern, noting the blind spots and weaknesses. By nightfall, he had found his opportunity. The first shot echoed like thunder across the canyon when Jake fired his plasma revolver, taking down a sentry perched on a high ledge. Sparks flew from the hover sled's energy shields as he swung a rope, hooking it to the convoy's side. With a leap that only a man like Jake could make, he swung himself onto the fortress roof, landing silently behind 2 more guards. Ahioka watched from her cage, sensing movement. Her instincts screamed that someone was here to help, but who? Her eyes narrowed as a shadow moved across the floor above her. Then the door to her cage clicked. "Are you going to sit there, or are you going to stand?" Jake said, his voice low but firm. Ahioka hesitated. She had been taught never to trust easily. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "The name's Jake. I'm here to get you out." He quickly cut the energy cuffs with a plasma knife, sparks dancing as the metal melted. "I don't know what those bastards told you about anyone helping, but I don't lie." Her eyes studied him carefully. His coat was torn, his hat slightly scorched, and a faint streak of blood ran across his cheek. He had fought for her already. Something in his calm courage drew her trust, little by little. "Then move fast," she said. "They'll be back soon." Jake nodded. Together, they climbed to the roof of the fortress using the shadows as cover. The mercenaries were distracted by the hover sled alarms, giving them just enough time to reach the edge. Jake tossed a grappling hook to his hover horse, and they leapt, landing with a soft thud on the red sand below. The desert wind caught Ahioka's hair as they ran. She felt the first real taste of freedom in weeks, and her heart pounded with something more, hope. Jake ran beside her, his presence steady, like a shield. "We're not safe yet," he said, scanning the horizon. "They'll come after us." Ahioka nodded, catching her breath. "I can help." "Show me where we're going." Jake allowed her to take the lead. She knew the terrain, remembered paths she had traveled as a child with her tribe. Together, they moved through canyons and dry riverbeds, avoiding patrols and using natural cover. At night, they rested under rock overhangs, watching the twin moons rise over Red Mesa, casting a pale light across the desert. Around the fire, Ioka finally spoke of her tribe, of the life she had lost and the home she hoped to find again. Jake listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. His eyes reflected the firelight, steady and honest. There was something in her story that stirred something long buried in him, a sense of purpose beyond survival, beyond bounty hunting. Days passed. They faced sandstorms that tore at their clothes and skin, alien predators that prowled the night, and treacherous terrain that threatened to separate them forever. Yet every obstacle only brought them closer. Ahioka's respect for Jake grew with every action, every moment of selfless courage. And Jake saw in Ahioka not just a survivor, but a warrior, someone who could match him in skill and heart. Finally, as the suns began to rise, casting the desert in shades of pink and orange, Jake and Ahioka reached the top of a high ridge. Below lay the mercenary fortress, far in the distance, smoldering and abandoned. Their escape had been successful. For now, Ahioka turned to Jake, her dark eyes reflecting a mix of relief and something unspoken. "You saved me," she said quietly. Jake shrugged, looking out over the desert. "We saved each other." For the first time since her capture, Ioka felt the weight of fear lift. Freedom was not just the absence of chains. It was the knowledge that she could make choices for herself. And standing there with Jake, she felt the stirring of trust, of a bond forged in the harshest fires of Red Mesa. The wind carried the promise of adventure ahead. Their journey was far from over. The desert had more trials, more dangers, and more stories waiting to be written. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough to face anything the galaxy could throw at them. As they mounted Jake's hover horse and rode toward the horizon, the twin suns burning behind them, Ioka allowed herself a small, rare smile. Somewhere deep in her heart, she knew that this cowboy, rough, scarred, fearless, was more than just a rescuer. Perhaps one day he could become something far more. And for now, the desert stretched ahead, wild and untamed, a place where legends were made, and a woman's heart could begin to heal. The desert stretched endlessly before them, waves of red sand rolling like an ocean under the twin suns. Jake's hover horse glided smoothly across the dunes, its thrusters humming softly. Beside him, Ahioka rode with the skill of someone born to the land, her eyes sharp, scanning every ridge, every shadow. She had regained her freedom, yes, but the journey ahead was far from safe. Jake had a plan. He would take Ioka to a remote settlement on the far side of Red Mesa, where her tribe had relocated after the mercenary raids. The path was treacherous, full of canyon chasms, alien wildlife, and rogue scavengers who preyed on travelers. Every mile they covered brought them closer to safety and danger. "Stay close," Jake said, his voice calm but firm. He adjusted his hat against the blazing sun. "These sands aren't friendly to strangers." Ioka nodded. She had learned long ago that survival depended on alertness. "I know how to move quietly," she said, her hand brushing the edge of the plasma knife at her belt. "You'll see," Jake smirked. "Good. I like a partner who can fight." The first test came sooner than expected. A sandstorm erupted on the horizon, black clouds spinning like a living wall. The wind howled, carrying shards of red sand that cut against their skin. Jake pulled his coat tighter, and Ahioka wrapped her scarf over her face, leaving only her eyes exposed. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and the desert seemed to turn against them. "We can't stop now," Jake shouted over the roar. "Hold on." The hover horse leapt over a dune, its thrusters straining against the wind. Ahioka held tightly, letting instinct guide her. She had faced storms in her childhood, storms that threatened to bury entire villages. This was nothing compared to those memories. Together they pushed through, lungs burning, muscles straining, until finally the storm passed, leaving the desert quiet again, except for the faint hiss of the hover horse. Later that evening they made camp in the shadow of a massive rock formation. The sky was ablaze with stars, alien constellations sparkling in ways that reminded Iokoa of her home. She unpacked a small ration pack, offering a piece to Jake. He shook his head, already accustomed to surviving with less. "You saved me," she said quietly, her voice soft in the desert night. "I owe you more than words can say." Jake looked at her, eyes reflecting the starlight. "We saved each other," he replied, "and don't worry about thanks. Just keep your eyes open and your mind sharp." Ahioka studied him carefully. He was rugged, scarred, and weary, yet something about him was different from the others she had known. He carried no arrogance, no false bravado, only honesty and strength. For the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of trust, a fragile but growing bond. Their journey continued across jagged canyons and dried riverbeds. They avoided mercenary patrols using hidden paths and old maps that Jake had scavenged from abandoned settlements. Along the way, Iokoka began to share stories of her people, tales of courage, tradition, and survival. She spoke of the Apache ways, of their connection to the land, of the songs and dances that honored the desert's power. Jake listened quietly, learning, respecting. He had wandered from planet to planet, never staying long enough to know a place. But here, in the harsh beauty of Red Mesa, he began to understand something new. A life worth protecting, a world worth fighting for. One morning they encountered a pack of alien predators, creatures that looked like a cross between wolves and reptiles, with glowing eyes and sharp serrated claws. The creatures prowled the canyon floor, circling like shadows, waiting for an opening. Jake reached for his plasma revolver, but Ayuka held up a hand. "Let me try first," she said, her voice steady. She stepped into the open, moving like a shadow, silent and precise. Using a combination of old hunting techniques and the knowledge of the alien terrain, she led the predators away from their path, drawing them into a narrow gorge. Jake followed, providing cover with careful shots, ensuring none got too close. When the last predator slumped, defeated by traps and fire, Jake nodded in respect. "Impressive," he said. "You're a natural." Ahioka smiled faintly, but her eyes softened. "I had to survive," she said. "I know how to fight, how to track, how to protect myself. You saved me once. I'm returning the favor." The night after the attack, they shared a quiet moment by a small campfire. Ioka cleaned the minor cuts on her hands, and Jake tended to his horse, polishing the plasma revolvers. Silence stretched between them, comfortable and warm. "You're not like the others," Ahioka said after a while, her voice low. "You could have left me, and no one would have blamed you." "I've left a lot behind in my life," he admitted. "But some people are worth the fight." He glanced at her, and for the first time his usual stoic expression softened. "You're one of those people." Ioka looked away, feeling something unfamiliar stir in her chest. She had spent so long in captivity, alone, mistrustful. But here, with Jake, she felt a tentative warmth, an ember of connection she wasn't ready to name. Days later, they reached a canyon that overlooked a vast valley. Settlements of humans and alien tribes dotted the landscape, small but thriving. It was a glimpse of hope, a promise that freedom was not just a word but a place. Before they descended, Jake stopped. "We need to be careful." "The valley looks safe, but there are always dangers." Ahioka nodded, scanning the horizon. "I see paths the mercenaries could take," she said. "We can avoid them. I know these lands." Jake smiled faintly. "Good. Lead the way." As they moved through the valley, they encountered traders and settlers. Some eyed them warily, others offered food and water. Ioka's presence and calm demeanor, combined with Jake's protective vigilance, earned them trust quickly. For the first time in weeks, they felt a sense of community, of belonging, however fleeting. One evening, while camped near a small alien water source, Jake taught Ayoko how to use a high-tech scanner to detect danger. She learned quickly, adapting old skills to new technology. Together, they became a team, moving silently, anticipating threats before they appeared. The journey was far from over. Mercenaries could still pursue them, and Red Mesa's harsh environment was unforgiving. But with each mile, each trial, the bond between Jake and Ahioka deepened. They respected each other's strengths, relied on each other's skills, and slowly, trust began to turn into something more, a connection forged in survival and shared hardship. As the twin moons rose over the valley, casting pale light over the desert sands, Ahioka finally allowed herself a small, rare smile. She had been captured, hunted, and forced to survive on her own. But now, with Jake beside her, she felt hope. Freedom was not just the absence of chains. It was the ability to choose, to act, to live. And she had chosen her path. Jake looked at her, noticing the change. The firelight danced in her eyes, and for a moment he saw not just a survivor, but a strong, courageous woman capable of facing the galaxy on her own terms. He had rescued her body, but she had rescued her spirit. Together, they were unstoppable. The desert stretched ahead, vast and untamed, filled with unknown dangers and adventures yet to come. But for now they rode side by side, partners in survival, bound by respect, courage, and the faint stirrings of something more. Somewhere deep in her heart, Ayoka felt a whisper of trust, a quiet promise that she could rely on Jake, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And for the first time since her capture, she felt something she hadn't in weeks. Peace, and the hope that freedom might finally belong to her. The journey across Red Mesa was far from over, but together, Jake and Ayoka were ready for whatever the desert and the galaxy had in store. The valley below Red Mesa's jagged cliffs was alive with small settlements, built from scavenged metal, wood, and alien materials. Smoke rose from chimneys, and children's laughter echoed faintly through the dusty streets. Life persisted here, fragile yet determined, in the harshest of landscapes. For Jake and Ayoka, the settlement represented a sanctuary, a place to rest after days of danger. But danger has a way of finding those who think they are safe. As they rode into the settlement, Jake's eyes scanned the streets. He had learned long ago to trust his instincts, and something in the air made him uneasy. People watched silently from doorways and rooftops, their expressions wary, cautious. Word of mercenaries chasing captives traveled fast in these parts. Ayoka rode beside him, her posture alert, eyes sharp. She had come far since her capture, gaining confidence in her strength and skills. Yet even she sensed the tension in the settlement. "They know we're here," she whispered, her voice low. Jake nodded. "Yes, and that means trouble is close behind." They approached the town center, a dusty square surrounded by low buildings, and parked their hover horse near a water well. Settlers cautiously approached, offering water, rations, and warnings. One man, grizzled and scarred, handed Jake a small comm device. "This came from the north," he said. "Mercenary leader Grissom. He's tracking a woman, Apache. He doesn't stop for anything." Jake's jaw tightened. He had expected this, but hearing the name sent a ripple of tension through him. Grissom was notorious, a ruthless hunter who would chase his prey across planets, indifferent to danger or law. Ayoka's hand went instinctively to her knife. "I will not go back to them," she said firmly. "I've survived everything they've thrown at me. I will survive this too." Jake placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We won't let them take you. Not now. Not ever." Together, they moved through the settlement, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Jake reinforced stores with metal plates and energy locks scavenged from old machinery. Ayoka taught a few settlers how to set traps and alarms, using the skills she had honed in the desert and in captivity. Slowly, the settlement became more than a refuge. It became a fortress, ready for the storm to come. As dusk fell, casting long shadows across the square, the first signs of Grissom's approach appeared. Dust rose on the northern horizon, and the unmistakable hum of hover sleds filled the air. Settlers scrambled to their positions, children were moved to hidden shelters, and Jake and Ayoka took their place at the center of the defense. When the mercenary convoy arrived, Grissom's voice rang out, amplified by a comm device. "Ayoka, you will come with me. There's no escape." Ayoka stood tall, her voice unwavering. "I am free. I will never go back to you." The battle began. Energy beams flashed across the square as mercenaries advanced, their laser rifles cutting through the dusk. Jake moved with precision, taking down enemies while protecting the settlers. Ayoka moved like a shadow, her plasma knife and clever traps, dispatching those who tried to flank her. Together they formed a perfect team, instinctively covering each other's weaknesses and strengths. Grissom himself appeared, towering and menacing, a heavy plasma cannon slung across his shoulder. His eyes locked onto Ayoka, and a cruel smile twisted his features. "You are mine," he growled. Ayoka stood her ground. She had been hunted and imprisoned, but never broken. "I am not yours!" she shouted. Jake stepped in front of her, his revolvers drawn. "You'll have to go through me first." The fight escalated into a high-octane duel. Jake and Grissom exchanged fire across the dusty square, beams of light cutting through the evening air. Ayoka used the chaos to her advantage, setting traps that toppled hover sleds and disarmed mercenaries. The settlers joined in, defending their home with makeshift weapons and courage born from desperation. Grissom charged, cannon blazing, but Jake anticipated his movements, diving behind a barricade and returning fire with deadly accuracy. Ayoka moved swiftly, using the shadows and her knowledge of the terrain to strike from unexpected angles. In the heart of the battle, there was a moment of stillness. Jake and Ayoka found themselves back to back, surrounded but undeterred. Each movement was synchronized, a dance of survival. They were not just fighting for freedom, they were fighting for trust, for the right to choose their own paths. Ayoka glanced at Jake, her eyes fierce but soft. We make a good team, she said, breathless. Jake smirked a rare, genuine smile. The best. Together, they focused on Grissom. Using a combination of traps, precise shots, and cunning maneuvers, they cornered him near the edge of the canyon. The ground shook as his hover sled toppled, and he fell to his knees, defeated. I will return, Grissom spat, but his voice lacked conviction. The settlers cheered, and the mercenaries scattered, realizing their leader was beaten. The battle over, Jake and Ahioka stood amid the quiet aftermath. Smoke curled from the damaged buildings, and the desert wind carried the scent of scorched metal. The settlers approached them, offering gratitude and relief. But Jake and Ahioka needed no thanks. Their focus was on each other, on the bond that had grown stronger with every trial. Ahioka finally allowed herself to exhale fully. For the first time, the fear that had shadowed her since her capture lifted. She had faced the mercenaries, survived the desert, and reclaimed her freedom. And she had done it not alone, but with Jake by her side. Jake's hand brushed hers, a silent acknowledgement of the connection between them. They had fought together, survived together, and now they stood stronger for it. Night fell over the settlement, and the twin moons rose, casting silver light across the canyon. Jake and Ahioka walked to a quiet overlook, away from the settlers, and gazed at the stars. You know, Jake said, breaking the silence, I've wandered a lot of planets, fought a lot of battles, but this is different. You're different. Ahioka looked at him, her expression thoughtful. I never thought I would find someone I could trust again, she admitted. But with you, I feel safe. And not just safe in body, but safe in spirit. Jake smiled, his hand finding hers. You don't have to fight alone anymore. Not ever. The desert wind carried their words across the canyon, a promise against the hardships of Red Mesa. For the first time, Ahioka allowed herself to hope, not just for survival, but for a life of her choosing. The battle had been won, but the journey was not over. The galaxy was still vast, filled with dangers and adventures beyond imagination, but they had each other, and that made them stronger than anything that could come next. As they sat together under the twin moons, a quiet understanding passed between them. Their bond was forged not just in rescue, but in trust, respect, and the unspoken promise of more to come. Somewhere deep in her heart, Ahioka felt the first stirrings of something she had not allowed herself to feel in years, a tentative, cautious, but undeniable hope. Freedom had been reclaimed, but choice, and perhaps love, was now hers to embrace. Jake looked at her, noting the change. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a warrior, a partner, someone who had stood beside him through fire and sand and mercenary attacks. And he knew, without a doubt, that whatever came next, they would face it together. Red Mesa's twin suns had set, and the desert was bathed in silver moonlight. The settlement slept, but the heroes remained awake, watching, planning, ready for whatever the galaxy had in store. For Jake and Ahioka, the confrontation was over, but their story was just beginning. The frontier settlement slowly returned to life after the battle. Broken walls were repaired, damaged machines were fixed, and the people worked together with quiet determination. Smoke no longer rose from burning metal, but from cooking fires and workshops. The danger had passed, at least for now. Ahioka stood near the edge of the settlement, looking out at the wide valley. The desert wind brushed against her face, warm and gentle. For the first time in a long while, she felt calm. No chains, no orders shouted at her, no fear following her every step. She was free. Jake watched her from a distance, leaning against a wooden post near the water well. He had been offered payment, supplies, even a place to stay by the settlers. But his eyes kept returning to Ahioka. He had rescued many people in his life, but none had stayed with him like she had. After a moment, Jake walked toward her. His steps were slow, respectful. The settlers want us to stay a few days, he said. They think the mercenaries won't be back any time soon. Ahioka nodded. That is good. They need peace. She paused, then added softly, So do I. They walked together through the settlement. Children ran past them, laughing, chasing a small hovering toy. An old woman smiled at Ahioka and placed a hand over her heart in thanks. Ahioka returned the gesture, feeling something warm bloom inside her chest. She was no longer seen as a captive or a prize. She was seen as a person. That night, the settlement held a small gathering. There was simple food, soft music played on old instruments, and stories shared under the stars. Jake sat beside Ahioka, listening as settlers spoke of rebuilding and hope. One man raised his cup. To freedom, he said. To freedom. the others echoed. Ahioka repeated the word quietly to herself. Freedom. It no longer felt fragile. It felt real. Later, when the crowd thinned and the night grew quiet, Ahioka walked alone toward a small hill overlooking the valley. The twin moons hung low in the sky, casting silver light over the sand. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. Footsteps approached behind her. I thought I'd find you here, Jake said gently. She did not turn right away. I come here to think, she replied. My people believe the land listens when you speak honestly. Jake nodded. Then I'll listen too. She turned to face him. In the moonlight, his face looked softer, less worn. When you freed me, she said, I thought only of survival. I wanted to live, to escape. I did not think beyond that. Jake stayed silent, letting her speak. But on this journey, Ahioka continued, I learned something. Freedom is not only running away from pain, it is choosing where you stand. Who you stand with. Jake's heart beat faster, but he did not interrupt. I was taken from my people, she said. I lost my past, but I do not want my future to be empty. She met his eyes. You never tried to own me. You never forced my trust. You stood beside me even when it was dangerous. Jake swallowed. I just did what felt right. Ahioka took a step closer. That is why I choose you. The words hung in the air, simple but powerful. Jake looked at her, surprised. Choose me, how? In my culture, she said calmly, a partner is chosen, not claimed. I do not choose you because you saved me. I choose you because you respect me. Because you see me as your equal. For a long moment, Jake said nothing. Then he removed his hat, holding it against his chest. Ahioka, he said slowly, I've lived my life alone. I never thought I deserved more than the road, but if you're choosing me, then I choose you too. Not as someone to protect, but as someone to walk beside. Ahioka smiled. It was not a shy smile, but a strong one. A smile of certainty. The next morning, the settlement woke to a quiet celebration. There was no grand ceremony, no loud music, just a gathering near the edge of the valley. Ahioka wore traditional markings, simple but meaningful. Jake stood beside her, dressed in his worn coat, looking more nervous than he ever had in a gunfight. An elder from the settlement spoke words of unity and respect. A partnership is not about ownership, she said. It is about shared strength. Ahioka and Jake placed their hands together, palm to palm. No rings, no contracts, just choice. The settlers cheered softly, respectful and warm. After the gathering, Jake and Ahioka prepared to leave. The road still called to Jake, and Ahioka knew her people were waiting beyond the valley. But this time, she would not walk alone. Jake loaded supplies onto the hover horse. We can head east, he said. Your people's lands are safer that way. And after that? Jake smiled slightly. After that, we see where the road takes us. They rode out as the suns rose, painting the desert in gold and red. The settlement grew smaller behind them, but the future stretched wide ahead. As they traveled, they spoke of many things. Of rebuilding her people's home. Of helping others trapped by mercenaries. Of quiet days and long rides under open skies. Jake realized something as they rode side by side. For the first time in his life, he was not running. He was moving forward. Ahioka felt it too. The pain of her past did not vanish, but it no longer controlled her. She had survived. She had chosen. And she had found someone who honored that choice. As night fell, they stopped near a cliff overlooking the endless desert. Stars filled the sky, bright and countless. Jake started a small fire. Funny, he said. All the planets I've seen, and this one still feels like the most alive. Ahioka sat beside him. The land remembers courage, she said, and kindness. Jake looked at her, his voice steady. I promise you this. Wherever we go, you will always have a choice. Always. She reached for his hand. That is all I ever wanted. The fire crackled softly as the wind moved across the sand. Two lives, once broken and wandering, now shared a single path. They were not escaping the past anymore, they were building a future. And under the vast sky of Red Mesa, a cowboy and an Apache woman rode on, not as rescuer and captive, but as partners, equals, and family.